You have 18 minutes before 6 men start asking why the 7th chair is empty. The old man said it without raising his voice, and that was what made Captain Ethan Cole tighten his grip on the handcuffs. Morning wind swept across the east gate of Fort Halstead, carrying the dry rattle of flag halyards and the distant hum of generators waking across the base. At 9:42 a.m., Thomas Mercer stood beside a military police cruiser with his wrists held behind his back, his brown coat moving lightly in the cold. He was 84, tall despite the bend in his shoulders, with white hair cut close and eyes the pale gray of a winter sky. He had not resisted. He had not argued. He had only looked past Cole toward the ceremonial field half a mile away, where 6 command flags snapped above a row of empty chairs. Cole stepped closer. At 31, he wore authority like polished armor. His uniform was immaculate, his jaw clean-shaven, and his confidence came from years of trusting systems that had never failed him. "Is that supposed to be a threat?" he asked. Mercer glanced at the clock mounted above the gatehouse. "No, Captain. It is a courtesy." Sergeant Ryan Keller stood a few feet away, one hand resting near his radio. He had been the one to fasten the cuffs, but something about the old man's calm unsettled him. Most trespassers protested. Most men caught with suspicious credentials tried to explain. Mercer had done neither. He had arrived on foot carrying a small wooden box beneath one arm and presented an identification card older than Keller. The card bore no rank, no branch insignia, and no expiration date. It showed only a faded photograph, the name Thomas Mercer, and a black code stamped beneath it, Mercer, 7. When Keller scanned it, the terminal had gone dark for 3 seconds. Then a single line appeared. No record found. Captain Cole had taken that as proof of fraud. Keller was not so sure. He had worked enough gates to know the difference between an invalid credential and a system refusing to answer. Cole turned toward the gatehouse window. "Run it again." Inside, Specialist Daniel Brooks fed the card through the scanner a second time. The monitor flickered. The same message returned. No record found. But in the corner of the screen, for less than a second, a gold shield appeared beside a warning neither Cole nor Keller noticed. Access level insufficient. Mercer watched Brooks through the glass. Their eyes met briefly. The young specialist stopped moving. Cole took the wooden box from the hood of the cruiser. It was no larger than a cigar case, dark with age, its edges worn smooth by decades of handling. 7 circular spaces had been cut into the velvet lining. 6 held tarnished military coins. The 7th was empty. "What is this?" Cole asked. "It belongs at the ceremony," Mercer replied. "You are not getting anywhere near that ceremony." Cole shut the lid with a hard click. Across the field, a brass band began testing its instruments. A low note rolled through the air, then vanished. Mercer looked again at the clock. 9:43, General Harrow is expecting me. Cole gave a short, humorless laugh. General Harrow is expecting governors, senators, and 5 other general officers. He is not expecting an old man with fake credentials. Mercer's expression did not change. He left a chair. Cole nodded toward Keller. "Search the box. Then move him to holding." Keller hesitated. "Sir, maybe we should call the command office first." Cole's eyes hardened. "The command office is preparing for the largest leadership ceremony this base has hosted in 20 years. We are not interrupting 6 generals because a confused civilian knows one of their names." Mercer turned his head slowly toward him. "Captain, I know all 6. For the first time, the wind seemed to fall away. Brooks looked down at his monitor, where the gold shield had appeared again. Keller stared at the 6 coins inside the box. Cole only smiled, certain he had heard the final proof of delusion. He guided Mercer toward the cruiser. The old man took one step, then stopped. "At 10 o'clock, he said quietly, "they will begin without me." At 10:01, they will realize they cannot. The gatehouse clock changed to 9:44 as Sergeant Ryan Keller opened the rear door of the cruiser, but Thomas Mercer did not bend to enter. His attention remained on the wooden box in Captain Ethan Cole's hands. The 6 tarnished coins inside had been arranged with exact care, each one resting beneath a different faded name carved into the velvet. Cole had not noticed the names. Keller had. William Harrow. Rebecca Shaw. Michael Grant. Robert Hayes. Stephen Collins. Andrew Wallace. Every name belonged to a general scheduled to appear at the ceremony that morning. "Where did you get these?" Keller asked. Mercer looked at him with the patience of a man answering a question that should have been asked earlier. "They gave them to me." Cole opened the box again and examined the coins beneath the pale light of the gatehouse. Each carried a different unit emblem, worn almost smooth by time. None looked valuable. None looked official enough to impress him. "You expect us to believe 6 generals handed you personal challenge coins," he said. "They were not generals then," Mercer replied. A gust crossed the checkpoint and lifted the hem of his brown coat. Beneath it, Keller saw a plain white shirt, an old leather belt, and no medals. Nothing about Mercer announced importance. That seemed to strengthen Cole's certainty. "Search his coat," Cole ordered. Keller stepped forward reluctantly. Mercer gave a slight nod and allowed him to check the outer pockets. There was no weapon, no phone, and no wallet beyond the old identification card already sitting beside the scanner. Keller found only a folded handkerchief, a brass key, and a yellowed photograph protected inside a clear sleeve. He held it toward the morning light. 7 young men stood beside a damaged transport helicopter on a muddy field. Their uniforms were stained, their faces thin with exhaustion, but they were smiling. One of them was unmistakably Mercer, nearly 60 years younger. The other 6 looked familiar in a way Keller could not immediately place. "Captain," he said quietly. Cole took the photograph and studied it for only a second. Old military pictures are easy to find. Look at the men beside him. "I am looking." "Really look." Cole's impatience sharpened. "Sergeant, you are allowing a civilian story to interfere with procedure." He turned the photograph over. A single sentence had been written on the back in faded blue ink. 7 went in. 6 came home because Mercer stayed behind. Beneath the sentence were 6 signatures. Cole gave the photograph back as though it carried dust. Sentimental nonsense. Mercer's eyes rested on the picture. For the first time, something deeper than calm passed across his face. It was not anger. It was distance. For one brief moment, the clean pavement beneath him seemed to disappear beneath river mud, and the brass band across the field became the low pulse of rotor blades fading into a dark sky. Then the memory closed. "Put it back," he said. Keller returned the photograph to the coat pocket with greater care than he had removed it. Inside the gatehouse, Specialist Daniel Brooks stared at his monitor. The gold shield had remained on the screen this time. Beneath it, a second line appeared. Legacy identity. Command review required. Brooks reached for the telephone. Cole saw the movement through the glass and pointed at him. "Do not call anyone until I authorize it." Brooks froze with his hand above the receiver. "Sir, the system is requesting command review. The system says there is no record." "That is not all it says." Cole entered the gatehouse and leaned toward the monitor, but the warning vanished before he could read it. The screen returned to its blank gray field. He looked at Brooks with cold suspicion. "You misread it." Outside, Mercer turned toward the ceremonial grounds. 6 black staff vehicles were visible beyond the distant hangars, moving slowly toward the reviewing stand. The arrival sequence had begun. Keller checked his watch. 9:47, "Sir," he said, "we should verify those names before we move him." Cole returned to the cruiser carrying the box. "We have verified enough." He placed it on the front seat, shut the door, and motioned toward Mercer. "Take him to holding." Mercer finally lowered his eyes from the 6 command flags. "You can take me there," he said, "but do not lose that box." Cole smiled without warmth. "Why? Is it going to summon the generals?" Mercer looked toward the approaching vehicles. "No, Captain. It is going to tell them why I was late." Sergeant Ryan. Keller guided Thomas Mercer away from the east gate at 9:48, but Captain Ethan Cole did not take the direct route to the holding room. Instead, he led them across the edge of the ceremonial grounds, where rows of soldiers stood preparing for the arrival of senior command. It was a deliberate choice. Cole wanted the arrest scene. He wanted the base to understand that no name, no age, and no faded photograph placed anyone above security. Mercer walked between the 2 military police officers with his hands secured behind him, his brown coat stirring in the wind. He kept his head level. Gravel pressed beneath his polished but worn shoes. Nearby conversations softened as people noticed the old man in handcuffs. A group of young officers standing beside the reviewing stand turned to watch. One of them glanced at Mercer's coat and gave a faint smile. "What happened there?" another asked. Cole answered loudly enough for the nearest formation to hear. "Fraudulent credentials and attempted entry into a restricted command event." The words traveled farther than necessary. Mercer said nothing. Keller looked toward the command flags and felt the discomfort in his chest deepen. 6 flags stood in a precise line behind the platform. Beneath them were 7 chairs. 6 carried polished brass nameplates. The last chair had none. Mercer slowed when he saw it. The movement was so slight that only Keller noticed. His gaze settled on the empty place at the far end of the row. "Keep moving," Cole ordered. Mercer obeyed, but his eyes remained on the chair. "They remembered," he murmured. Cole heard him. "Remembered what?" Mercer looked forward again. "Enough to leave room." At the edge of the square, the brass band stopped its final rehearsal. The sudden quiet made the click of Mercer's handcuffs unusually clear. Several soldiers shifted uneasily. An older master sergeant near the platform studied Mercer with narrowed eyes, then looked toward the wooden box visible through the window of Cole's cruiser. Recognition did not come, but suspicion did. This did not look like a confused trespasser. It looked like a mistake unfolding in public. Cole continued toward the security building with deliberate strides. "You know what your problem is, Mr. Mercer," he said. "You believe knowing a few names makes you important." Mercer's voice remained steady. "No, Captain. Knowing what those men were before they became important is what brought me here." Keller turned his head slightly. Cole did not. "You memorized a ceremony program. You found an old photograph. You made a false identification card. That is not history. That is preparation. Then ask General Harrow what happened at Bell River." Cole stopped. The officers behind them went quiet. "What did you say?" "Bell River," Mercer repeated. "Ask him who carried Michael Grant for 3 miles after the evacuation route failed. Ask Rebecca Shaw why she still refuses to sit with her back to a window. Ask Robert Hayes what he promised beside the burned bridge." Keller felt the air change. Those were not public facts. At least, they did not sound like facts anyone would place in a ceremony program. Cole stepped closer to Mercer, lowering his voice. "You have spent a great deal of time building this story. I spent one night living it." Across the grounds, 6 black vehicles turned onto the final approach road. The soldiers nearest the reviewing stand straightened. Staff members began moving into position. It was 9:51. Inside the gatehouse, Daniel Brooks watched Cole escort Mercer past the windows. The warning had returned to his monitor, brighter than before. Legacy identity confirmed. Notify command immediately. Brooks stared at the words, then reached for the telephone again. This time, he did not hesitate. Outside, Cole ordered Keller to open the security building door. Mercer paused on the threshold and looked back at the seventh chair. Morning sunlight touched its empty seat. 9 minutes, he said. Cole shook his head. Until what? Mercer met his eyes. Until 6 generals discover that the man they came to honor is being processed as a criminal. The security building door closed behind them at 9:52, sealing out the wind and the distant movement of the ceremony. Inside, the air smelled faintly of floor wax, old paper, and coffee that had been sitting too long. Captain Ethan Cole directed Thomas Mercer into a small interview room with a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 plain chairs. Sergeant Ryan Keller removed the wooden box from the cruiser and placed it on the table. Mercer remained standing, his hands still secured behind him. "Sit down," Cole said. Mercer looked at the chair, then at the box. "Open the cuffs first. You are not in a position to negotiate. Neither are you, Captain. You just have not realized it yet." Cole pulled out the opposite chair and sat, calm on the surface but increasingly irritated by the old man's refusal to appear intimidated. Keller stayed near the door, watching both of them. Through the narrow window, the command vehicles could be seen crossing the last quarter-mile toward the reviewing stand. Cole opened the box and lifted the velvet tray. The 6 coins shifted softly in their carved spaces. Beneath the tray was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, and beside it a 7th coin broken cleanly in half. One side was darkened by heat. The other carried the faint outline of an eagle. Mercer's expression changed the moment Cole touched it. "Leave that where it is," he said. Cole turned the half coin between his fingers. "Why?" "Because it does not belong to you. Nothing in this room belongs to you until we verify who you are." Cole held it toward the overhead light. "This is what all the mystery is about. Half of an old coin." Mercer's eyes remained fixed on the metal. "The other half is in General Harrow's left breast pocket." Keller looked at Cole. "Sir, that is easy to check." Cole ignored him. "You expect me to believe the senior general at this event has carried the matching piece for nearly 60 years? He has carried it every day since Bell River." Cole gave a small, dismissive laugh and reached for the envelope. Mercer stepped closer to the table. The handcuffs gave a quiet metallic sound behind his coat. "Do not open that. You are under investigation for attempting to enter a restricted ceremony with false credentials." "I will open anything relevant. Those letters were written by men who believed they would never see another sunrise." Cole broke the seal. Keller drew a slow breath. Inside were 6 folded sheets, each marked with a name. The paper had softened at the edges, but the handwriting remained dark. Cole opened the first letter. It contained only one sentence. "You made it home. Live worthy of it." He opened the second. The same sentence. The third carried the same words. Each had been signed by a different young officer. William Harrow. Rebecca Shaw. Michael Grant. Robert Hayes. Stephen Collins. Andrew Wallace. Cole placed the letters on the table in a row. "You wrote these yourself?" Mercer looked at him for a long moment. "No. They wrote their names. I wrote the reminder." The room seemed smaller after that. Keller studied the signatures and recognized the precise, familiar shape of General Grant's name from official orders. Cole saw his hesitation. "Signatures can be copied. So can confidence," Mercer said. "That does not make it authority." Cole's jaw tightened. He dropped the half coin onto the table. The sound was light, almost insignificant, but to Mercer it became something else. The fluorescent hum faded. Cold river water rose around his knees. Smoke pressed low beneath a gray sky. 7 young men stood in the shadow of a burned bridge while a helicopter circled somewhere beyond the ridge, unable to reach them. A hand closed around his wrist. His younger brother Daniel pressed half a coin into his palm and said, "Take them across. I will hold the signal light." Mercer blinked, and the interview room returned. The broken coin lay beneath Cole's fingers. "Captain," Keller said carefully, "we need to call General Grant's office now." Cole looked toward the wall clock. 9:54, "We need facts, not stories." At that moment, the telephone outside the room rang once, stopped, then rang again on the command line. Keller reached for the door. Cole raised a hand. "Stay here." The telephone rang a third time. Mercer looked at the clock, then at the 6 letters spread across the table. "You have 6 minutes," he said. "After that, facts are going to walk through that door." The command telephone continued ringing outside the interview room, but Thomas Mercer no longer heard it. His eyes remained on the broken coin beneath Captain Ethan Cole's hand, and the white walls of the security building dissolved into a valley buried beneath rain and smoke nearly 60 years earlier. Mercer was 25 again, standing knee-deep in the Bell River while cold water pulled at his uniform and 6 exhausted young officers waited beneath the remains of a wooden bridge. Their radio had failed before dawn. Their evacuation point was less than 4 miles away, but the ridgeline between them and safety had vanished behind fog. William Harrow was barely conscious, one arm around Michael Grant's shoulders. Rebecca Shaw held a water-damaged map against her chest. Robert Hayes kept looking toward the eastern bank, where the last signal light had gone dark. Stephen Collins had lost one boot in the mud. Andrew Wallace, the youngest of them, kept asking the same question. "Where is Daniel?" Mercer already knew the answer. His younger brother had remained behind near the ridge with the second half of the coin and the only working signal lamp. Daniel had understood what Thomas refused to say aloud. 7 men could not cross the river before daylight unless someone stayed behind and drew the search aircraft toward the western slope. "He is buying us time," Mercer had said. Harrow shook his head. "Then we wait for him." Mercer stepped close enough that the young lieutenant could see the truth in his face. "You wait, all 7 of us disappear." The rain ran from the edge of Harrow's helmet. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Mercer placed the 6 officers in a line and led them into the current. He carried Harrow when the lieutenant could no longer stand. He tied Collins's missing boot with a strip torn from his own sleeve. He guided Shaw through the deepest section by watching the way leaves circled around submerged rocks. Every 50 yards, he turned toward the ridge, searching for the glow of Daniel's lamp. It appeared 3 times through the fog. Then it vanished. By sunrise, Mercer had brought all 6 men to the evacuation field. A transport helicopter dropped through the clouds, its rotor wash flattening the wet grass around them. The crew pulled the officers aboard one by one. Mercer remained on the ground. Harrow reached down from the open door. "Come with us." Mercer looked back toward the river. "My brother is still there. You cannot go alone." He did. Mercer closed Harrow's hand around one of the 6 challenge coins issued to their advisory group. "Keep this until I return." Then he walked away from the helicopter and disappeared into the rain. The memory shifted. 6 young officers stood beside that same aircraft 2 days later, thin, silent, and alive. Mercer returned alone, carrying half a coin darkened by heat. No report ever explained how he found his way back. No ceremony recorded what he had lost. The official file described Bell River as a successful extraction conducted under restricted authority. 6 names remained visible. 2 were removed. The interview room returned with the sharp ring of the command telephone. Mercer's breathing was steady, but his eyes held the weight of the river. Cole lifted the broken coin again. "You expect us to believe this proves all of that?" Mercer looked at the 6 letters on the table. "No. Their lives prove it." Sergeant Ryan Keller opened the door before Cole could stop him. Specialist Daniel Brooks stood outside, pale and breathless, holding the telephone receiver away from his chest. "Captain," Brooks said, "the Command Operations Center is on the line." They confirmed the identity. Cole rose slowly. "Whose identity?" Brooks looked past him toward Mercer. "Thomas Mercer. Legacy designation Mercer 7. The wall clock changed to 9:56. From across the ceremonial field came the distant sound of vehicle doors closing. Brooks swallowed. They also asked one question. Cole's voice had lost its certainty. "What question?" Brooks answered quietly. "They want to know who put him in handcuffs." For 1 second, no one in the interview room moved. The command telephone remained in Specialist Daniel Brooks's hand, its coiled cord stretched tight across the doorway. Captain Ethan Cole stared at him as though the words had arrived in a language he did not understand. "Confirmed by whom?" Cole asked. Brooks glanced at the receiver. "Command Operations transferred me to Lieutenant General Grant's executive officer. He verified the legacy file and ordered us to keep Mr. Mercer exactly where he is." Thomas Mercer looked at the wall clock. 9:57, 3 minutes remained before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Sergeant Ryan Keller stepped behind Mercer and reached for the handcuff key. Cole raised his hand. "Stop." Keller froze. "Sir, command confirmed his identity. They confirmed a designation. We still do not know what it means." Brooks's expression tightened. "They know what it means." The telephone crackled against his palm. A distant voice called his name. Brooks lifted the receiver. "Specialist Brooks speaking." He listened, then straightened so quickly that the cord struck the doorframe. "Yes, Colonel. He is here." "Yes, sir. Captain Cole is present." His eyes moved toward Cole. "Understood." Brooks slowly extended the receiver. "The duty colonel wants you." Cole took it with visible reluctance. "Captain Cole." The voice on the line was too quiet for the others to hear, but they watched the change in his face. Confidence gave way to concentration. Concentration became disbelief. "Sir," the individual presented credentials that did not validate through standard channels. A pause. "Yes, sir, he is restrained." Another pause, longer this time. Cole looked at Mercer. "Because I assessed him as an unauthorized entrant." The answer from the other end came hard enough to make Cole pull the receiver slightly away from his ear. He said nothing for several seconds. Then he placed the telephone on the desk without ending the call. "Keller, remove the cuffs." Keller moved immediately. The key entered the lock with a soft click. Mercer brought his hands forward and rubbed one wrist, not from pain, but from stiffness. He did not look at Cole. Instead, he reached for the broken coin. Cole's hand moved toward it by instinct, then stopped. Mercer lifted the darkened half and set it gently beside the 6 letters. "What did the colonel say?" Keller asked. Cole remained standing near the telephone. "He said 6 general officers have left the reviewing stand." Outside, the first notes of the ceremonial march began, then ended after only 4 measures. Through the narrow window, soldiers who had been facing the platform turned toward the security building. The 6 black staff vehicles were no longer parked beside the field. Their engines had started again. "Where are they going?" Brooks asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Cole looked at the clock. 9:58, here. Mercer began returning the letters to their envelope. His movements were slow and exact. He folded the velvet tray over the coins and lowered it into the box. Keller helped without being asked, placing each item where Mercer indicated. Cole watched them, the authority in his posture beginning to feel like a uniform borrowed from someone else. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I acted on the information available to me." Mercer closed the lid. "No, Captain. You acted before information became available." Cole's face tightened. This checkpoint is responsible for protecting senior leadership. Protection without judgment is only obstruction. The words were quiet, but they filled the room more completely than any command. Outside, the sound of engines grew louder. Not one vehicle. 6. Brooks stepped to the window. A line of black command cars crossed the ceremonial square, passing the empty platform and the 7th chair. Soldiers along the route snapped to attention without being ordered. At the front of the convoy, 2 silver stars flashed on a door panel. Behind it came another vehicle, then another, each carrying rank high enough to stop every conversation on the base. Keller looked at Mercer. "Did you know they would come?" Mercer lifted the wooden box beneath one arm. "I knew they would remember." The clock changed to 9:59. The command cars stopped outside the security building in perfect sequence. 6 doors opened almost at once. Cole turned toward the entrance. From the hallway came the measured sound of footsteps, slow and unified, approaching without announcement. Mercer stood beside the table, his coat still wrinkled from the handcuffs. "1 minute," he said. Then the outer door opened, and every person in the building came to attention. The first man through the doorway was Lieutenant General Michael Grant, and the room seemed to contract around the weight of his presence. He wore no expression at all until his eyes found Thomas Mercer standing beside the metal table. Then something changed. Not rank. Not command. Recognition. Grant stopped so abruptly that the 5 officers behind him nearly closed the distance. General William Harrow entered next, followed by General Rebecca Shaw, Lieutenant General Robert Hayes, Major General Stephen Collins, and Brigadier General Andrew Wallace. 6 uniforms. 6 sets of stars. 6 faces that had aged across nearly 60 years, yet Mercer knew each of them before they spoke. Captain Ethan Cole stood rigid near the wall, his hands at his sides. Sergeant Ryan Keller and Specialist Daniel Brooks remained at attention. No one announced the generals. No one needed to. Harrow's gaze moved from Mercer's wrinkled coat to the open handcuffs lying on the table. His eyes settled there for a long second. "Who restrained him?" he asked. Cole swallowed. "I did, General." Harrow turned toward him, but Mercer spoke first. "William." The use of the first name struck the room harder than a shouted command. Harrow looked back at the old man. The authority left his face. What remained was the young lieutenant from Bell River, soaked by rain and too exhausted to stand. "You came," he said. Mercer lifted the wooden box. "You left a chair." Rebecca Shaw stepped forward. Her eyes shone, but her voice remained controlled. "We sent cars to your house. I moved last winter. You could have called." Mercer looked at the 6 of them. "I did not know whether you still remembered." Robert Hayes gave a quiet breath that was almost a laugh and almost something else. "Tom, every year we remember." Harrow reached into his left breast pocket. Cole's face went pale before the object even appeared. Between the general's fingers was the matching half of the burned coin. Its broken edge caught the fluorescent light. Mercer placed his half on the table. Harrow set his beside it. The 2 pieces joined so perfectly that the seam nearly disappeared. No one spoke. One by one, the other generals reached into their uniforms and removed the coins Mercer had given them after Bell River. Michael Grant placed his down first. Rebecca Shaw followed. Then Hayes, Collins, Wallace. Harrow added his last. 6 coins formed a line beside the restored 7th. Andrew Wallace, the youngest of the generals, looked at Mercer with the same uncertain expression he had worn beside the river nearly 60 years before. "You told us to live worthy of it," he said. "We tried." Mercer studied their faces. "That was never an order." "It became one," Shaw replied. The wall clock changed to 10 o'clock. Across the ceremonial field, the audience waited before an empty platform. Harrow stepped toward Mercer and stopped at arm's length. He looked again at the handcuffs. Thomas Mercer was invited here as the honored guest of this command, he said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his rank. He was not required to prove himself to anyone at that gate. Cole found his voice. "General, I was following security procedure." Michael Grant turned toward him. "Procedure told you to verify. It did not tell you to humiliate." Cole's shoulders tightened. "Sir, the identification returned no record." Brooks spoke before fear could stop him. "It returned insufficient access, sir." Silence settled again. Harrow did not raise his voice. "Captain Cole, you are relieved of checkpoint authority pending formal review." Cole stared forward. "Yes, General." Mercer closed the wooden box. "Do not decide his life in this room." The 6 generals looked at him. "He protected the gate badly," Mercer continued, "but he can still learn what the gate protects." Harrow considered the words, then nodded once. Outside, the band remained silent. The soldiers waited. Mercer placed the box beneath his arm and turned toward the door. All 6 generals stepped aside to clear his path. Then Harrow called the room to attention. The order was not for Mercer. It was for everyone else. 6 generals raised their hands in salute as the old man walked between them, and the only sound in the building was the clock marking the first second after 10. Thomas Mercer stepped into the hallway with the wooden box beneath his arm, and the 6 generals followed him toward the outer doors. No one hurried. The base had already stopped around them. Soldiers stood motionless along the route. To the ceremonial field, their attention fixed on the old man in the worn brown coat walking at the center of 6 officers whose combined rank could command armies. The morning wind had strengthened, pulling at flags and sending a dry whisper across the grass. Captain Ethan Cole remained inside the security building under Sergeant Ryan Keller's watch, but Specialist Daniel Brooks followed several paces behind, still trying to understand how a name hidden from every ordinary system had just brought the highest officers on the base to a complete halt. When Mercer reached the entrance, General William Harrow moved ahead and opened the door for him. The gesture was small. The effect was not. Every soldier who saw it straightened further. Outside, the brass band waited with instruments lowered. Hundreds of guests faced an empty platform. Governors, senior officers, families, and veterans had expected a formal procession. Instead, they watched Thomas Mercer cross the square with 6 generals forming a silent escort around him. The sound of his old shoes on the pavement carried farther than the music had. Near the reviewing stand, the master sergeant who had watched Mercer being led away earlier removed his cap and held it against his chest. Others followed without instruction. Mercer's gaze remained on the 7th chair. It sat at the far end of the platform, plain and unmarked, with a narrow beam of sunlight resting across the empty seat. Harrow stopped beside the steps. "The center chair is yours," he said. Mercer looked toward the chair reserved for the honored guest, positioned between the command flags. "No," Harrow studied him. "Tom, this ceremony exists because of you. Then it should remember the man who did not come home." Mercer climbed the steps slowly. General Rebecca Shaw reached toward his arm, but he gave her a slight nod and continued without assistance. At the 7th chair, he placed the wooden box on the seat and opened it. The 6 tarnished coins lay in their spaces. The restored 7th coin rested in the center, its dark seam still visible. Mercer lifted it carefully and placed it on the nameplate stand where no name had been engraved. Andrew. Wallace lowered his eyes. Michael Grant stood with his jaw set. Robert Hayes turned toward the flags as if searching the moving fabric for something that had been lost in another century. Mercer faced the audience. He did not approach the microphone. Harrow did. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general said, "the ceremony will begin differently than planned." His voice carried across the field. "Nearly 60 years ago, 7 men entered Bell River Valley. 6 of us returned because 2 brothers decided our lives were worth more than their own safety. One of those brothers stands before you. The other has never had a grave. The crowd became completely still. Harrow turned toward Mercer. Thomas Mercer brought us home. Daniel Mercer made that possible. Mercer looked at the seventh chair, and for a moment the field vanished from his eyes. He saw rain running from a signal lamp. He saw a young man smiling through exhaustion. He heard the last words his brother had spoken before turning back toward the ridge. Keep them moving. The memory passed. Mercer closed the box and left it on the chair. Then he stepped away from the center of the platform and stood beside it instead. One by one, the 6 generals moved to join him. They did not take their assigned seats. Harrow raised his hand. The other 5 followed. Across the field, officers and enlisted soldiers came to attention and returned the salute. No command had been given. None was needed. Mercer stood beside the empty chair while an entire base honored the brother whose name had been removed from history. The band remained silent. The flags cracked in the wind. And for the first time that morning, Thomas Mercer lowered his head. The salute ended only when Thomas Mercer raised his head. General William Harrow lowered his hand first, and the others followed, but the silence across Fort Halstead remained. It was no longer the silence of surprise. It was the silence of recognition, the kind that settles over people when history stops being a story and stands before them in a worn brown coat. Harrow approached the microphone again, but Mercer touched his sleeve. "That is enough," he said. Harrow looked toward the waiting crowd. They should know what happened. Mercer's eyes returned to the 7th chair. They know what matters. The 6 generals understood. One by one, they removed their challenge coins from the box and placed them along the front edge of the empty seat. Harrow left the restored coin in the center for Daniel Mercer. No band played. No prepared citation was read. The names on the printed program suddenly seemed too small for the weight of the moment. At the edge of the field, Captain Ethan Cole stood beside Sergeant Ryan Keller. His checkpoint authority had been suspended, and the polished certainty he had carried that morning was gone. He watched the old man he had dismissed receive more respect in 5 quiet minutes than most officers witnessed in a lifetime. When the ceremony ended, Cole asked permission to approach. Harrow looked to Mercer. "It is your decision." Mercer nodded. Cole crossed the field alone. He stopped several feet from the platform and stood at attention. "Mr. Mercer, I was wrong." Mercer studied him without anger. "Yes." The simple answer struck deeper than accusation. Cole swallowed. "I judged the situation before I understood it. I used procedure to justify disrespect." "Procedure did not disrespect me," Mercer said. "You did." Cole lowered his eyes. "I have no excuse." "Good. Excuses are poor instructors." General Michael Grant watched from nearby, but he did not interfere. Cole looked toward the 7th chair. "I heard what your brother did." Mercer's voice softened. "You heard part of it. I am sorry. Then remember him the next time someone stands at your gate without the right appearance, the right paperwork, or the right voice. Verify what you must. Protect who you should. But do not confuse suspicion with truth." Cole nodded slowly. "I will remember." Mercer looked toward Harrow. "Do not end his career over one morning." Harrow's expression remained firm. "That decision belongs to the review board. Then tell them I asked for correction, not destruction." Rebecca Shaw stepped closer. "Why?" Mercer looked at Cole. "Because men are not measured only by their worst decision. They are measured by what they do after it." Cole stood straighter. For the first time that day, his posture held humility instead of pride. Mercer stepped down from the platform without assistance. The 6 generals offered to drive him home, but he declined every car. He preferred to walk the short distance to the visitor center, where a county bus stopped each afternoon. Harrow tried once more. "Tom, at least let us escort you." Mercer glanced back at the seventh chair. "You already did." He crossed the square alone while soldiers along the route stood at attention. No one called his name. No one asked for proof. Behind him, 6 generals remained beside the empty chair, guarding a memory the official record had almost erased. The wind moved through the command flags, carrying the faint metallic sound of 7 coins resting together. Some men wear their rank on their shoulders. Others carry it in the lives they brought home.